The 2020 Errata. What is that? And can I use it to replace my player's handbook? Let's talk about that, shall we? So what's an errata? Well, it's defined as a list of corrected errors, and now this will make more sense for newer books, but Wizards is essentially applying patches to Dungeons & Dragons via just calling them this. But I hear you asking, why? Well, like any game, despite that this is a written mostly game, not everything that is put out there is perfectly balanced, and there are going to be subclasses and options that do have a little more power than maybe some of the other player options out there. Totem Barbarian. So it makes sense that in the modern era, that even tabletop games like D&D and probably any of the other ones that are out there would want to be able to fix some of the more rare imbalance issues that can happen, because at least as far as I've been able to tell, there generally isn't as much heavy pushing in the tabletop space as there is in the video game space, though I could be very wrong on that. But maybe otherwise this can also allow for some classes to gain a number of buffs that they would otherwise need. See Beastmaster Ranger. No, my cough is not back yet for that. However, this does present a fair number of issues. The first of which we'll talk about is if you are like me and you do kind of prefer getting some of the print options still and the physical books, then it may be a little complicated in order to update the game for yourself. Although I will note that you can really just choose as a DM which and if any of these errata changes that you wish to apply to your games in any of the mediums of game that you have for tabletop. But unless you're playing Adventurers League, then really you kind of have to figure it out. Unfortunately, you can't just write in specific notes for some of the stuff you want to do unless you're some monster that enjoys ruining printed artwork. But I do have a couple of suggestions. The first one is sticky notes. You can either write any of the patches that you wish to follow or print out the screenshots and attach those parts of the PDF onto the note and place it on the page of where it's relevant. While this is a useful measure for patching the things that you find where or maybe are specific problems, it isn't really necessary to change most parts of an errata. A lot of things are just purely small grammatical one-word changes that unless it has come up in a game for you, it really may not make a whole difference. But for example, a spell changing from a bonus action to an action is a significant change that you probably should likely consider following. Now, luckily, if you're a digital gamer and, for example, you play in a system that utilizes PDFs of the books to help with accessibility, the use of a PDF editor like Adobe is always a great option. Otherwise, for D&D, if you're digital, then you'll be utilizing D&D Beyond. You'll likely see any changes out for that one added shortly after they are released. So the process becomes pretty seamless and there's really nothing for you to do directly. So let's go over the final pieces of updating a game that generally will always have a perpetual printed version of it, and especially people like me who like to have these printed at least core books, should maybe deal with. Should I donate my old handbook and buy the most current one? No. But if you have had any particular struggles with definitions written in the book, this can be a good way to see if Wizards, for example, at least with D&D, has had any new additions to help clarify some of the tricky definitions that maybe have come up for certain games and arguments that have maybe brought into significant question, as not all of the changes in the errata are minor that people maybe never have argued about or have thought that might be important. Although this kind of does pose a bigger question about the future of tabletop games and RPGs. Previously, with games like D&D or even Pathfinder, not all that long ago, would come out with multiple versions of a handbook. However, now more than ever with the current state of things, it does feel as though resources like D&D Beyond are showing us that having a digital resource is incredibly important to not just accessibility, but clearly for fixing games and maybe parts of games that aren't perfectly well balanced on release. However, tabletop games, IMO, are always best played on the tabletop, and the physical feeling of the physical copies is just something that you really can't change. Though, for at least allowing for just small notes to be added to $60 books, rather than the alternative, which was needing to buy 2 or more $60 books. That's going to do it for this video today. If you would like to talk about maybe how other games should implement erratas if they are not already, or other games that are doing erratas in their own update or at least patch notes in their own way, then let me know in the comments below and we can have a discussion about maybe what the future of being able to update tabletop games might look like.